Last year, I wrote the soundtrack for Obsidian Entertainment's Avowed, and I've created a course with nearly 20 hours of content where I break down everything, from how I set up my DAW, to the gear I used, to breaking down every single cue inside of the game, including ones not on the official soundtrack. If you want to check it out for yourself, you could find the link down below. I remember the first time I heard something like this, and I had a very hard time convincing myself that it was actually music. But now, here we are. In the last couple decades, there's been a very interesting change in a lot of music, and I'm sure it's something you've noticed for yourself, whether consciously or not. And this goes beyond just music. It's maybe even a reflection of the way we're starting to change how we interpret the world of sound around us. And this shift has led a lot of people to ask a very similar question. Where did all the melody go?
The most challenging part of this piece of music was how the hell are we gonna be able to record this live with an ensemble?
Almost all forms of music, from film scores to game music to underground genres to pop music, have followed this same trend of changing their focus from melody and harmony to something that aims to sound a little more interesting. And this raises a very compelling question. Is melody really that important in music? Well, I don't think so. And in this video, I want to talk about why.
Let's say you found a chord progression that you really like. How do you write a melody line that fits with it?
3 ingredients that make up great melody.
It seems like we've reached peak melody. If you think of classic scores like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Harry Potter, I'm sure you'd agree with me that they were heavily focused on overt melody and harmony. But in recent years, with films like Waltz with Bashir, The Social Network, or The Witch, there's been a distinct shift in the sound of modern music into a more amorphous, textural atmosphere thing.
It's going to add this nice little bit of sort of like interesting texture, and it's also going to add just a little bit of pacing to it. Listen to this.
In popular music, this same development is just as easy to spot. If you compare something like Mariah Carey and the Red Hot Chili Peppers to artists like Sophie or Billie Eilish, I think you'll hear what I mean. Entire genres of music have even emerged around this same transition, especially within the electronic music realm, with artists leaning more and more heavily into an emphasis on sound design in their production. So what exactly is causing all of this? Well, I think it's a little more complicated than just saying it's the decline of melody in music. Instead, what I think we're witnessing is an evolution in the role of melody within music. The simple fact of music is there are only so many notes and chord progressions available to us, and throughout the history of music, everyone has used up basically all of them. And sure, there are some different ways to put them together in different genres and whatnot, but there are only so many ways to put the puzzle pieces together in a way that makes sense. So artists have inevitably had to expand into the final frontier of music, and the thing that I think makes it into something truly infinite: timbre, or the sonic characteristics of sound. It's interesting to note that this movement also extends beyond the world of music and has become part of a broader shift embracing imperfection and emphasizing flaws. Shows like Euphoria use analog film to add more visual character. Textures and glitch overlays are all the rage on social media apps and in video editing. And there's been a rise in dedicated apps and software like Fujicam emulating disposable cameras on smartphones. And all of this serves to add these analog artifact emulations across different artistic mediums. Perhaps that's to evoke a sense of authenticity that we feel is ever more lacking in our hyper-polished digital world. I think this is more than just a simple stylistic choice, though. It's almost a philosophical statement about the nature of reality and our place as human creators within it. Just as visual art is embracing these imperfections, music is embracing these sonic textures and quirks that were once considered flaws. And, maybe Brian Eno put it best. As soon as something can be avoided, it'll be emulated. So where exactly did all of this start, then? Well, for that, we need to rewind a bit. Much of this stems from the land of dreams and homeless people trying to sell you a mixtape outside of a CVS parking lot, Hollywood.
Backstage and see this unique and fascinating place called Hollywood.
In early silent films, music was used as an emotional device that featured predominant use of melody and harmony to clearly convey an emotion or theme due to the lack of, sound. As the technology of filmmaking evolved to add things like dialogue or sound effects, music shifted into more of a supporting role.
In this crazy world. Someday you'll understand that.
While it was still very melodic, there's a clear shift away from it taking such a forward place in the sonic landscape of film. Now, in contemporary scoring, both sound and music are used as a narrative device, with many composers often blurring the line between music and sound effects, generally with both playing a role of equal importance and featuring less emphasis on traditional music composition. This evolution highlights the undeniable importance of sound. Sound design is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than music when it comes to evoking emotions or creating a sense of atmosphere and leading a narrative. Films like No Country for Old Men and the original Paranormal Activity are perfect examples of the role of sound over music. With the former having extremely minimalist soundscapes with almost no music,
There's this boy.
that perfectly encompasses the themes of the movie, and the latter having a score arguably consisting of only a tense, low, rumbling drone sound. That is infinitely more effective than a suspenseful melodic horror score would ever be. This idea that sound design is a part of music that evolved from a supporting element to a crucial narrative tool shaping the audience's emotional response is what so heavily contributed to what I think we now see as the overall cinematic experience. Sound itself is a language, and yeah, while in some cases it's just this low, grumbly, drony thing, that simple idea is capable of carrying so many incredibly complex emotional connotations and driving an entire story. This is the thing that has fascinated me about sound for my entire life. It's something I love exploring in my own music, and it's the thing that's probably responsible for my entire musical output. And I hope that someday someone much smarter than myself is going to be able to explain exactly how that works and why that is. Of course, all of this goes beyond just film music. There have been several studies about the decline in melodic content and complexity in contemporary music. Alongside this, we've also seen more focus placed on sound design and sonic character within the sounds of popular music. The origins of all this, however, lie elsewhere. In the early 50s and 60s, we saw the rise of distortion effects on guitars, with tracks like Rocket 88 or, of course, Electric Dylan, which at the time were highly controversial, but likely stemmed from a growing sense of artistic boredom with the expected sound of the instrument, or its timbre. So what exactly is timbre, then, and why is it so important? This is a sine wave. It's the most pure form of a sound. Now let's play that same note on a piano. And how about on a synthesizer? And now what about a weird bowing technique on a cello? It's a weird question to ask, and it's maybe a weird thing to think about, but I would love to know what you think each of those changes in that sound implies. And it's a crazy thing, right? Each of those notes is the same frequency, they're the same volume, they're about the same length, but each one of those could not be more different from one another. And I think that brings us nicely into our good friend that I want to talk about next, noise. Traditionally, noise was avoided in music, but early experimental artists like John Cage and Karlheinz Stockhausen pushed the boundaries of the traditional sonic palette with compositions that sometimes bordered on sonic experiments.
John Cage and Water Walk.
Not everyone was a fan of this expansion away from melody in music, though, and even today this is something that people love to bitch and moan about on different corners of the internet because nothing is ever good enough for them, other than gooning over tall goth mommy, that is. And in fairness, maybe this isn't without good reason, you know? Some people just love a good melody, and from more of a psychology perspective, melody and harmony play a very important role in the fundamental way our brains assign value and emotional connection to music. But noise and timbre play an equally important part in that. And maybe this is just because some people can't appreciate this idea as a shift in perspective rather than a dismissal of melody altogether. Music, like all things, is completely subjective. What someone else thinks is a meandering pile of harmonically ambiguous mush is someone else's favorite thing. And what another person considers the most compelling example of motivic development, someone else might just find to be a trite repetition of a given formulaic answer. Like anything in music, noise is just a tool, and one that is perfectly capable of giving a deep and powerful feeling in its own right. I know up to this point we've mostly been discussing newer music, and that might frame all of this as kind of a recent development, but it's absolutely not. In fact, this has been in the works for quite a while. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, composers like Tchaikovsky, Anderson, and Respighi made use of unconventional sounds in their works, expanding on the musical palette of what was considered acceptable in composition. While it might seem a little tame by today's standards, this was actually a pretty big deal at the time. By 1913, Luigi Russolo, an Italian painter and composer, even wrote an essay on the development of noise in a musical context, where he theorized that this evolution maybe reflected a changing, potentially more chaotic world, or just an oversaturation of traditional melody in music. It's actually an incredibly interesting read that I'd recommend checking out, and it's only about 4 pages, so if you do want to read it, I've linked it down there. All of this early experimentation paved the way for 20th century movements that redefined the musical boundaries. Composers like Arnold Schoenberg defined the modernist movements in music, with his compositions featuring a distinct lack of melody. And others, like Arseny Avramov with his industrial Symphony of Sirens, challenged the very definition of music. Even by today's standards, that one's actually pretty fucking insane.
The arrival of tape recorders meant even the most basic sounds could be transformed.
The mid-20th century saw further innovation with movements like musique concrète, serialism, microtonal music, graphic composition, and of course minimalist movements as artists like Steve Reich, Robert Fripp, and Lamont Young explored new boundaries of what was even accepted as a musical idea. I don't know about you, but personally for me, something like lighting a fire and maybe or maybe not standing in front of it, yeah, that might be a little bit out there. This trajectory exponentially continued with the rise of electronic music and early forms of sampling, as well as with the anti-establishment and almost anti-art ethos of the Fluxus movement. All of these precedents demonstrate that this was not just a sudden thing that happened, but a continual, slow evolution of what was considered a valid form of musical expression. But these ideas were going to get pushed to their absolute limits in the following decades with music's next frontier, and something that I fucking hated the first time I heard. Noise music. Into the 70s and 80s, of course, we had the rise of punk music, and as a branching side effect, things like the no-wave scene and New York's underground noise music scene. By this point, noise music was becoming well established, and artists like Merzbow went full tilt into the chaotic and atonal sound of abrasive noise as music. But all was not lost in the world of more standard musical ideas. All of this led to new trends emerging in more traditional musical contexts that were arguably more mainstream, with works like Philip Glass's Glassworks or Tristan Murail's use of spectral music. Today, I would argue that we see noise music's influence and expansion into a much more accessible form. Things like modern sample libraries, synthesizers, and plugins make these more complex timbres readily available to producers, and of course, with home studio technology, things like sampling and deeper sonic experimentation are far more trivial than they were in the past. And I would say it's all of that that leads us to where we are now, at this strange confluence between noise and music that we hear all over the place, especially in what a lot of critics label as TikTok pop or stream bait music.
I'm about to make a beat out of a door stopper.
This thing.
Social media in particular is part of what has platformed this new wave of elements of noise music and furthered the focus away from melody as the primary aspect of a song, since it has expanded the reach and accessibility of music and broadening the potential audience that this new music can reach. Now, whether all of that is actually a genuine artistic expression and pioneering the use of noise in popular music, or just an incredibly shallow derivative and performative effort to shoehorn in funny sound that makes my brain tickle to trend in an algorithm, yeah, that's a little bit up for debate, but that's probably a subject I can just bitch about in a different video, so moving on. Not everything was about just making noise a part of music, though. Oftentimes, it was a combination of timbre and traditional elements that made the most impact. If you listen to something like Jerry Goldsmith's score of the original Planet of the Apes, you'll hear tons of extended instrument performance techniques that expand the sound of an orchestra into something more abstract, while still retaining a very solid sense of melody. In the 90s, recording technology, especially digital, was really taking off, and we see a clear rise in things like the experimental use of samplers and digital software, with melodic industrial music becoming especially prominent. These days, there are loads of artists experimenting with expanded digital tools and specialized music software, opening nearly endless sonic possibilities, making it pretty straightforward to turn even simple sounds into something much more complex. In recent years, we've seen a rise in experimental music-making equipment, especially in the side of boutique instruments and synthesizers and effects. And, of course, throughout all of this, the prominence of the use of things like field recording and capturing organic sound sources has made it easier than ever for artists to capture and manipulate unique and unconventional sounds. While melody and noise are on their own pretty separate, I think it's when they come together that we really start to get the magic sauce. Atmosphere. Horror music has always been at the popular forefront of atonality in music, with an incredible amount of importance placed on the atmosphere that it creates without the use of simple melodic tension. Popular music has started to leverage a lot of these ideas as well, especially in the realms of things like ambient or electronic music, with some genres like techno or industrial forgoing the use of melody altogether to create these grinding, churning atmospheres, and other genres leaning into more of a production-heavy sound where they have an emphasis on sound design over or alongside melody. Even the poppiest ends of music haven't been immune to this. We've seen a clear increase in the use of unconventional sounds and samples to create a sense of unique atmosphere and tone in pop productions. Things that would normally be considered sound effects are sometimes used as leading elements. Something like maybe Halsey's song Drive is a great example of that. The car door beeping leads in to establish everything else in the song, and really the entirety of the production of her album Badlands, I think, is a key example of this in pop music. With this decline in melodic and harmonic complexity we've witnessed, we've also seen an increase in what feels like tape loop style music, where a simple chord progression repeats throughout the entire song over and over, while the changes are provided solely through the evolution of timbre over time rather than harmony or melody. If you take a look at the chord charts for most top 40 songs in the last decade, you'll see what I mean. In the worlds of film and game music, there has been a clear normalization of the use of these repeating loops or pad-like textures alongside traditional elements to create this more evocative, dramatic, cinematic sound that's incredibly common now. And in other spaces, percussion has become an interesting question. Some artists prefer more quirky, obscure drum sounds, and they'll place them more up front in the mix to stand out and catch your ear, while other artists have just questioned the need for percussion in a song whatsoever. In the last maybe 5 years or so, there has also been a sharp increase in what I like to call Instagram ambient, or liminal ambient, which I touched on in a previous video, where soundscapes tend to blur the lines between music, sound design, and just simple ambient noise. In these styles, the noises and sound effects combine into a sonic soundscape to play the role of the melody, with other instruments that you would typically consider the lead playing more of a supporting role than a driving one. This, more than anything, might most clearly demonstrate the use of the timbre of sound as an emotional tool. If you listen to nearly any film score from the last 15 years, especially from services like Netflix, you're bound to hear these same rippling string textures as opposed to standard string instrument performances to create a sense of sonic intrigue. All of this abstract noise making is kind of a strange thing, but I think it's easy to observe why it's so important for yourself. Think of the sound of an 808 and compare that to its distorted counterpart. And you can really feel the sense of maybe unease that simple change can create. Or compare the sound of a simple performance on an instrument to a more evocative, texture-based one. Or just run some random plucky bullshit into any guitar pedal that looks good on an Instagram post. I think all of this goes to show that the act of creating sound is, in and of itself, a form of performance art. It's the idea of combining disparate sounds or elements to create an undiscovered sonic universe that pushes your ideas beyond something conventional. In some cases, it's just the idea of taking what may be regarded as an artifact or a mistake and forcing it into the realm of intentionality. While on the surface, it might seem pretty easy to create these dreamy atmospheres and moody soundscapes, and this is something that people love to point out and criticize online, it's actually a pretty delicate balancing act, and it's pretty difficult. I think it does require a good level of both discerning artistic taste and skill to put it all together in a way that really resonates with people. Alongside all of this, other creative mediums have experienced a pretty similar evolution with experimental films and art and online content venturing into a more characterful and abstract space. And I would say the rise of this in almost all artistic mediums in recent years has served to take what might feel like noise or chaos or dissonance or imperfections and break it from something avant-garde into something much more mainstream. This is all a movement that seems to continually expand, and I guess it's out of necessity because there's really nowhere else left in music to go other than forward, and perhaps even into something progressively more and more unknown. And with that being arguably the nature of creative spirit and art, I doubt that that's an idea that's going to go away anytime soon. More recent genres like hyperpop, color bass, and experimental rap, electronic, and post-rock are increasingly popular and have had an incredibly tight focus on the tonal quality and characteristics of sound as opposed to more simple melodic development. With the accessibility of modern music-making tools, things like more advanced sound design have become much more approachable to newer producers and I think inspire a sense of spontaneity and experimentation with the creative process that is bound to continue the evolution of this trend. Philosophers throughout the entirety of human history have examined the relationship between order and chaos, and I think that's kind of a neatly mirrored dance here in the rise of noise within art. And oh, god damn it. You know it's a YouTube essay by some jackass with a fancy camera when a line like this drops, but hear me out, okay? Maybe our friend, the second law of thermodynamics, tells us all we need to know here. Maybe the rise of noise within art is a sign of a creative universe trending towards complexity. It's an inexorable entropy that we, for whatever reason, instinctively find both inevitable and beautiful. Maybe the future of music isn't abandoning harmony and melody altogether, but something more chaotic and interesting. It's a new art of shaping noise into something meaningful. As long as you're willing to hear the music, that is.